The night did not fall on Jerusalem. It pressed down. Oil lamps burned low inside stone rooms, their flames weak, coughing smoke into the air. The walls had heard prayers for centuries, but tonight they felt different. Heavy, like they already knew what was coming. Outside, the wind carried a sound that did not belong to the city. Not voices, not bells. A deep rhythm, slow at first, then closer. Hooves. At first, people told themselves it was nothing. Traders arriving late, patrols changing shift. But the ground kept trembling. Not once. Again. Wood cracked somewhere far off. Then closer. A sound like the city itself being pulled apart. This was not battle yet. This was the moment before collapse. Inside the streets, mothers pulled children closer without knowing why. Priests stopped mid-prayer. Monks froze with hands still raised. Faith filled the air, thick as incense, but fear moved faster. It always does. When the walls finally broke, it did not sound heroic. Stone screamed. Dust rushed into mouths and eyes. Fire climbed where it did not belong. Armored men poured through the gaps, faces hard, movements trained, actions clean. This was not rage. This was work. A truce would come later. Words spoken calmly. Demands made politely. Hand over what you worship. Bend. Live. And when faith refused to bend, something worse than death followed. Because what happened next was not chaos. It was planned, counted, recorded, and at the center of it stood women who had chosen silence, prayer, and withdrawal from the world, only to be pulled into the heart of empire, where belief was treated as a resource to be crushed. This is not a story about one night. It is about what power does when it decides faith is a problem. Before we go further, stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Jerusalem had learned how to live with fear. For years, it sat between empires like a stone caught between grinding teeth. News always arrived late, carried by tired merchants or frightened pilgrims. A city taken, another burned, another taxed into silence. People listened, nodded, prayed, and went back to their lives. Because Jerusalem had survived worse. Or so they believed. But this time felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, like it resisted every breath. Olive oil lamps burned inside homes and churches, their flames low and nervous. Smoke clung to ceilings and walls, staining stone already darkened by centuries of incense. The streets were quieter than usual. Too quiet. Even the animals sensed it. Dogs did not bark. Birds did not settle. Faith filled the city, but it was tired faith. Faith worn thin by waiting. Jerusalem was not just a city. To the Christians inside its walls, it was the center of the world. The place where God had walked, where death had been defeated. Every stone carried meaning. Every church, every relic, every prayer tied them to something eternal. That belief was not decoration. It was structure. It held the city together. Outside the walls, the world was changing fast. The Persian Empire was moving west with purpose. Not like a storm, wild and directionless, but like a machine. Supplies followed armies. Orders followed maps. Victories were counted, written down, reported. And at the top of it all stood Khosrow II, a ruler who did not act out of madness, but calculation. Jerusalem was not hated. It was valuable. Break Jerusalem, and Byzantium would bleed. That was the logic. No emotion needed. As the Persian army approached, rumors rushed ahead of them. Cities that surrendered were stripped. Cities that resisted were erased. Some said mercy was possible. Others said mercy was just a delay before something worse. Inside Jerusalem, leaders argued quietly. Some wanted to negotiate. Others refused to consider it. Surrender meant handing over relics, symbols, faith itself. And once faith is traded for safety, safety rarely lasts. Among the people, fear did not scream. It whispered. Mothers packed bundles without knowing where they would go. Monks prayed longer than usual. Nuns sang at night, their hymns steady, as if volume could replace certainty. Soldiers walked the walls again and again, checking stones they already knew would not hold forever. And yet, the city did not panic. That is important. There were no riots, no collapse, no madness. People stayed. They chose to believe the walls would hold. They chose to believe faith meant protection. They chose to believe that holiness still mattered to empires. Far beyond the walls, siege engines were being prepared. Wood was tightened, ropes tested, orders repeated until they became instinct. Soldiers were told what to take, what to spare, and what not to question. Jerusalem did not know it yet, but it had already been reduced to numbers on a page. And the first number was time. The siege did not begin with shouting. It began with rhythm. A deep, steady pounding carried across the hills as the Persian army settled into position. Wood struck earth. Earth answered with dust. The sound moved through Jerusalem like a pulse, slow at first, then constant. People felt it through their feet before they heard it clearly. A warning traveling through stone. Then the sky filled. Stones rose into the air, dark against the morning light. Catapults hurled them with dull, heavy force. When they landed, they did not explode. They crushed. Roofs collapsed. Walls cracked. Streets filled with powdery dust that coated tongues and eyes. Every breath tasted of stone. Inside the city, defenders ran to their places. Not heroes, just people doing what they had trained to do. Bows bent, spears lowered. Doors were barred with wood already splintered from earlier strikes. Priests moved through the chaos, murmuring prayers that competed with the screams of breaking masonry. Jerusalem fought back. Arrows screamed down from the walls. Some found armor. Some found skin. The defenders cheered when a siege tower caught fire, when a rope snapped, when an enemy fell. These moments mattered. They bought time. Time felt like victory. For 21 days, the city held. That mattered too. Every sunrise felt borrowed. Every night felt like a pause in a sentence that had not finished yet. People slept in churches because stone felt safer than wood. Families pressed together in narrow rooms. The sound of prayer never stopped. It rose and fell like breathing. Outside the walls, Shahrbaraz watched. He did not rush. Shahrbaraz had learned patience in blood. He had taken cities before. He knew that panic made mistakes, and mistakes wasted men. He let the siege work. Hunger crept in. Fear settled deep. Stone weakened. Hope thinned. Then, finally, something gave. A section of the wall collapsed with a sound like the city crying out. Dust poured into the streets. Before defenders could react, armored soldiers surged forward. Not running wildly, moving in formation. Shields raised. Blades ready. The fighting inside the city was brief and brutal. This was not a clash of armies. This was an entry. Doors were kicked in. Streets were taken block by block. Resistance mattered less with every step. Numbers decided the outcome. They always do. Still, something unexpected happened. Shahrbaraz sent a message. A truce. His terms were simple. Surrender the city. Hand over the sacred relics. Submit to Persian authority. In return, lives would be spared. The city would remain standing. Faith could continue, under watch. The offer spread quickly. Some clung to it like a lifeline. Others rejected it outright. To give up the relics was to admit defeat not just of walls, but of meaning. At the heart of the city, leaders gathered. Words were chosen carefully. Faith was weighed against survival. Silence followed. The answer was no. The relics would not be surrendered. The city would not kneel. Shahrbaraz did not argue. He did not threaten. He nodded, turned, and gave a single order. The siege became something else. When the truce ended, mercy ended with it. The Persian soldiers moved with new purpose. This was no longer a negotiation. This was enforcement. Orders passed quickly, cleanly. Doors were marked. Streets divided. Sacred places identified not for protection, but for control. Fire followed structure. Churches that had stood for generations blackened as torches touched oil-soaked wood. Stone cracked under heat. Icons fell, faces shattered against floors once kissed by prayer. Smoke rolled through narrow streets, mixing with screams and choking the air until breathing itself became work. People ran, but there was nowhere to run to. Families were dragged from homes. Priests were struck down mid-prayer. Some fought back with whatever they could find. Chairs, stones, bare hands. It changed nothing. Resistance did not slow the machine. It only fed it. And then the focus narrowed. The nuns. They had lived apart from the city's noise, removed from politics, power, and trade. Their lives were measured in bells, labor, and prayer. They were not soldiers. They were not leaders. But they were symbols. And symbols mattered. Shahrbaraz understood that. Breaking soldiers broke armies. Breaking symbols broke memory. The convent on the hillside was surrounded before dawn. Persian riders circled it slowly, hooves scraping stone. Torches flickered, casting long shadows across pale walls. Inside, the sisters gathered without panic. Fear was there, yes, but so was resolve. They did not scream. They did not flee. They sang. Their voices were thin, trembling, but steady. Hymns rose into the cold air, defiant not because they were loud, but because they continued. Faith pulled inward, becoming something sharp and unyielding. The gates did not last long. When they fell, the violence that followed was not chaotic. It was divided, measured, assigned. Groups were separated. Numbers were spoken. Orders followed. What happened next was worse than death. Lives meant for silence and devotion were reduced to conquest. Bodies became territory. Faith was mocked, tested, crushed. Some sisters prayed through it. Others broke. Both suffered the same end. When it was over, steel finished what hands had started. The bodies were counted, recorded, stacked. This was not rage. This was policy. Back in the city, similar scenes unfolded. At the pool of Mamila, thousands were gathered together. Men, women, children promised safety. Instead, they found blades. Water turned dark. Numbers climbed. By nightfall, Jerusalem was no longer a city of prayer. It was a ledger. Shahrbaraz sent reports east. Victories confirmed. Objectives completed. Resistance neutralized. Khosrow would be pleased. But something had shifted. Even among the soldiers, silence spread. Not relief. Not triumph. A wait. The kind that follows acts that cannot be undone. The city was broken. But the consequences were only beginning. Mourning did not bring peace. It brought accounting. Jerusalem woke under smoke and ash. Fires still burned where no one remained to put them out. Stone streets were slick, not with rain, but with what was left behind. The cries of the night had faded into a hollow quiet that felt unnatural, like the city was holding its breath. Soldiers moved through the ruins with lists. This was the part history rarely shows. After the killing comes order. After chaos comes paperwork. Captives were gathered. Survivors pulled from hiding places, cellars, broken sanctuaries. Hands were bound. Names were not taken. Names slowed things down. Numbers were faster. Thousands were chained together. Men beside women. Elderly beside children. Priests beside merchants. Faith did not matter anymore. Only usefulness. Some would be sold. Some relocated. Some marched until they could not walk anymore. At the center of it all stood Patriarch Zechariah. He had refused to surrender the relics. Now he was paraded through the streets he once blessed. Chains bit into his wrists. His robes were torn, stained, unrecognizable. Still, he did not lower his eyes. The true cross was dragged behind him, not carried with care, not protected, treated like a trophy, silver dented, wood scraped, faith reduced to proof of conquest. Shahrbaraz watched the procession without expression. His task was complete. Orders had been followed. The machine had worked. Reports were sealed and sent east to Khosrow. Numbers tallied. Losses calculated. Gains recorded. The language was clean. Efficient. No room for screams or prayers. Jerusalem was now an asset. The captives were marched out of the city in long columns. 35,000, some said. Others guessed more. The road east was long. Many did not finish it. Those who fell were cut loose and left behind. Efficiency mattered more than mercy. Back in the ruined convent, silence settled. The bells would never ring again. Hymns would not return. The garden grew wild, untended. Blood soaked into stone floors smoothed by generations of prayer. What had happened there would not be written in official records. It did not need to be. The message was clear without words. Defiance would be erased. But systems leave cracks. Not all soldiers slept easily. Some drank until memory blurred. Others stared too long at nothing. A few quietly disobeyed orders when they could. One lowered his blade at the last moment and walked away before anyone noticed. Small acts. Quiet. Almost invisible. They did not change what happened. But they mattered later. Far away, in the Persian capital, Khosrow read the reports by lamplight. Victories confirmed his strategy. Jerusalem had fallen. Byzantium had been humiliated. Faith had been put in its place. Yet even as numbers pleased him, unrest followed the relic wherever it traveled. People whispered. Cities grew uneasy. Triumph carried a strange weight. Jerusalem was silent now. But silence, when stretched too far, breaks. The road east was long, and it remembered every step. Chains rubbed skin raw as the captives moved forward day after day. Dust-filled mouths. Sun-burned necks. At night, bodies collapsed where they stood. Some prayed. Some stared. Some stopped speaking entirely. When someone fell and did not rise, the column did not stop. A knife cut the rope. The march continued. This was how empire worked. Not cruelty for pleasure. Cruelty for progress. The true cross traveled with the column, wrapped in silk, guarded closely. Wherever it passed, people gathered. Some stared in fear. Some whispered prayers. Some turned away, unsettled by the idea that faith itself could be captured and dragged like an animal. Patriarch Zachariah walked beside it, chained, wounded, exhausted. Yet something strange happened. The further they marched, the less victorious it felt. Soldiers grew tense. Towns closed their gates early. Whispers spread faster than orders. The relic was meant to humiliate. Instead, it disturbed. Back in the Persian heartlands, reports began to change tone. Not celebration, justification, explanations. Supplies were delayed. Local unrest increased. The machine still moved, but it no longer moved smoothly. At court, Queen Shuri watched quietly. She was a Christian. Not loudly, not defiantly, carefully. She had learned long ago that survival near power required silence. But she saw what Khosrow refused to see. Victories that poisoned themselves. Numbers that hid rot. She began to ransom captives when she could. Quiet payments. Quiet releases. Names whispered, then forgotten. It was not mercy on a grand scale, but it was resistance small enough to survive. Meanwhile, Jerusalem sat hollow. Persian administrators taxed the ruins. Aqueducts were repaired. Markets reopened. Life returned in shape, not in spirit. The city functioned, but it did not breathe. Churches stood scarred. Convents remained empty. Faith continued, but softer, cautious, wounded. Jewish allies who had hoped for restoration watched Persian officials take control instead. Promises dissolved into bureaucracy. Hope turned into bitterness. Another crack in the system. Then came the backlash. Stories escaped. Not official reports. Stories. A deserter reached Byzantine lines. Survivors spoke. Traders carried whispers. Mothers repeated names of the dead. The image of the nuns spread like fire through Christian lands. Not as rumor, as memory. Resistance hardened. Supply lines were attacked. Garrisons thinned. Persian victories slowed. The war dragged on longer than planned. Hunger followed conquest. Soldiers grew tired. Nobles grew nervous. At night, Khosrow paced his gardens. Triumph no longer felt clean. The machine he built demanded more fuel than expected. More men, more gold, more silence. And silence was becoming impossible. The empire had crushed faith to win a war. It did not realize it had planted something else instead. The empire had moved like a machine, crushing cities, counting lives, and measuring victories. Yet even machines break, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. Jerusalem's ruin had been complete, but the world refused to forget. Patriarch Zachariah survived. Wounded, chained, and dragged through markets and villages, he remained alive where many others had not. His chains were heavy, but his faith was heavier. Every city he passed carried the echoes of what had happened. Mothers who had survived whispered to him. Children who had seen too much clung to his robes. And he remembered every face, every scream, every hymn that had died in the convent. In the Persian capital, Khosrow II continued his life of calculation. But the machine he had perfected began to choke on its own success. Supply lines stretched thin. Local governors argued over territories and taxes. Soldiers began to question orders. The true cross traveled through lands where it provoked more unrest than submission. The object meant to humiliate faith became a spark. Back in Jerusalem, life returned unevenly. Streets filled again with traders and pilgrims, but the stones were scarred and the walls remembered. Convents remained empty, churches silent, gardens unkept. Yet beneath the silence, memory persisted. Those who survived carried the story in whispers, in prayer, in song. Each recounting kept alive what the empire tried to erase. Even among the soldiers, the weight of what they had done did not vanish. Some dreamed of mothers, nuns, children. Some saw shadows in quiet corners. A few quietly disobeyed future orders, unwilling to repeat what they had been a part of. Small cracks grew in a system meant to be perfect, and those cracks would matter more than anyone imagined. Khosrow's empire did not last. Within a few years, internal strife, famine, and rebellion hollowed it out. Territories once conquered fell to new powers. Cities once numbered in his ledgers slipped from control. The march of armies continued, but the machine that destroyed Jerusalem could not be rebuilt. Jerusalem itself endured. Its streets bore scars, but life returned in small, stubborn ways. Priests resumed prayers. Children ran through alleys once thick with dust and smoke. Convents would eventually reopen, and gardens would bloom again. Yet the memory of the nuns, their defiance, their voices silenced too soon, lingered. The city had been measured, counted, and catalogued. But memory refused numbers. Centuries later, bones were uncovered, relics rediscovered, and stories pieced together. Archaeologists and historians traced the steps of that destruction, layer by layer, and found proof of what numbers could not fully show: the human cost. Every skull, every rib, every coin told the same story. Not chaos, not rage, system, planning, efficiency. Humanity crushed beneath orders, but also humanity surviving. Quietly, persistently, in cracks, in whispers, in memory. And today, if you walk through Jerusalem's streets, look to the Mount of Olives. Beneath your feet, the ground remembers. Almond petals fall where nuns once prayed. The city's heartbeat is soft, measured, unbroken. The machine may have counted lives, but it did not count courage, faith, or memory. Those things survived, carried through centuries, hidden but alive. Because power can erase, but it cannot erase the echo of defiance. The women who faced worse than death left a shadow that no empire could extinguish. And every time someone remembers, every time someone whispers their names, their story grows a little louder. The machine faltered. Faith endured. Memory survived. Humanity, fragile but relentless, continued.